Humans enjoy debate. More specifically, humans enjoy attempting to articulate their perspective in a more justifiable way than the other guy. It doesn't matter if it's the political state of Georgia, the country, not the state, or the optimal way to make espresso. People love to argue. When video games were invented, arguments comparing the quality of two pieces of media within the genre became commonplace, as one would expect. Whether it's Sonic vs. Mario, Sony vs. Microsoft, or PC vs. console, debates in gaming have always existed. It's easy to slip into asking the question, why should anyone care? However, these debates, as silly as they are, do matter. For instance, the battle between Sega and Nintendo that took place between the 80s and 90s was the first majorly propagandized debate in gaming history, starting many a fight in many a playground in many a school. But it meant something. The progression of this rivalry pushed both companies to make some of their franchises' best games, as well as encouraging both of them to push what was possible in terms of their consoles. The reason why Nintendo and Mario are perceived to have quote-unquote won this battle in hindsight is because Sega was the first one to have a real drop in quality, both in regards to their consoles and in regards to their games. This drop in quality is one that they're still recovering from, kind of, 30 years later. This debate wasn't just an argument. It changed the landscape of gaming to a significant degree. Debates this prolific often do that. Or at least, they did.
Let's get scratching.
In recent times, it's been incredibly common for debates to just be had. Points are said in the vacuous space of social media, voices aren't heard, nothing is accomplished, companies don't do anything in response to the debate, and it dies. However, sometimes the two sides feel so strongly about their perspective that they keep arguing, and arguing, and arguing, even after it becomes old and stale. This results in nothing but ongoing complaints and insults hurled at both games like stones from a trebuchet. The companies in their ivory towers see the rocks hurled at their respective games, but do nothing about it. To them, the tower they've built off the game's foundation is too comfy and strong to warrant updating the foundation. Meanwhile, the common foot soldiers beneath them continue perpetuating the war that the companies wish died long ago. It all started when the TF2 country, standing tall on its strong foundation, noticed that a rival foundation had been built. Across a field, soon to be tarnished, was a new foundation, named Overwatch. The two countries felt threatened by one another, and, in 2016, immediately entered a period of warfare, one that would continue for almost a decade. This is the age-old conflict of TF2 versus Overwatch. But why these two games in particular? What about these games brings about comparisons, pitchforks, and soyjack meme formats from the respective enjoyers of each of the games? Well, both of these games are team-based shooters with a focus on movement and teamwork. And that's about where the similarities end. Both games have a different setting, different styles of gameplay, different progression systems, different monetization models, etc., etc., etc. Those surface-level comparisons, combined with a few Overwatch characters being clearly inspired by TF2's classes, led to the TF2 fanbase throwing the first major stone at Overwatch's newly constructed walls. Overwatch was the first quote-unquote real competitor they had ever seen, so it was the target of a large barrage of criticism from the old guard of class-based, movement-focused shooters. They called Overwatch a ripoff, mocked the pay-to-play business model, the relative lack of content at launch, and made fun of anyone who dared say that Overwatch was even comparable to the god-tier status of Team Fortress 2. A lot of videos were made, of course, including this absolute gem by Matthew Mario is Mentally Ill Patrick.
It would appear as though I am on fire.
Oh my gosh!
I still cannot believe this is a real video that actually was made. Regardless, Overwatch continued progressing, garnering huge success in international markets from 2016 to 2019. It was also during this period that the aptly named Blue Moon update would be released for TF2 in 2018, the last major update added to Team Fortress 2 at the time of me writing this. Overwatch players have since, of course, took their requisite potshots at the absolute lack of developer support from their parent community. Team Fortress 2 defenders then pointed out that they practically have infinite community support, and then the argument goes so far down the thread that I've aged 8 years in the time it took me to read it. Seriously, if you were fans of either of these games, you know the pressure you felt online from fans of either game to choose a side. Which game was better? Loot boxes or crates? Team Fortress 2 is more fun, Overwatch is more balanced. The arguments piled on top of each other, one after the other after the other after the other, Choose now. You have to choose. You couldn't possibly like both. Choose, 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 choose. Then on November 1st, 2019, Overwatch 2 was announced. Not only that, but it would be free to play, and it would override Overwatch 1 entirely. No longer would it be able to be played. Immediately, comparisons and swords were drawn. TF2 players pointed out that their game had surpassed Overwatch in popularity, leading to Blizzard making the game free to play. Team Fortress 2 had killed Overwatch. It was stated as if it was fact. The Team Fortress 2 soldiers on the front lines paraded as they had slain the enemy. Meanwhile, the Overwatch soldiers stood dazed and confused about 10 feet away. Their game was getting a sequel. This is a good thing. Overwatch was so successful they gave it a sequel. Why are our enemies celebrating? We're right here, still standing, strong as ever. Soldiers stopped fighting significantly for the next 2.5 years. Any attack from the Team Fortress 2 side of the battlefield was deflected with the mention of Overwatch's upcoming sequel. Over time, Blizzard revealed new heroes, as well as the upcoming PvE mode, with talent trees to offer much more dynamic gameplay, all still for free. This didn't really lower the resolve of many TF2 players, as they were too busy complaining about the bot crisis that had snuck its way behind enemy lines over the past few years. The Valve company, in its tower, remained blissfully ignorant of the bots terrorizing the streets of their city. All was relatively peaceful on both sides. Then, while Overwatch's soldiers were relaxing in their tents and houses, the awaited sequel to Blizzard's beloved competitive shooter was released. The TF2 soldiers, preparing to fight the onslaught of passive-aggressive tweets made against their game, woke up to find that, to their surprise, the Blizzard company, in its ivory tower, had launched a drone strike upon its own soldiers.
It's time for the moment you've been waiting for.
Overwatch 2 had one of the worst launches in video game history, complete with horrible queue times, server crashes, character imbalance, and unkept promises by the company. Following the drone strike was the gas bomb of realization, as the stench of the newly introduced Battle Pass, pay-to-win mechanics, and lack of pro-consumer practice swept over the Overwatch 2 camp. The TF2 soldiers looked at the fire, Overwatch's soldiers scattering here and there, and smiled. They turned around to see their city. Though it was overwhelmed with the organized bot crime, it was still standing, and the tower Valve sat within had never looked stronger. The Overwatch soldiers did everything they could have, setting up temporary walls to protect from outside attack. On the walls was written, PvE, and Blizzard listens to fans. Meanwhile, they pleaded with the company, still sitting high in its tower. The company saw the walls the soldiers had built, and systematically tore each of them down to the ground over the course of the next year. The last remaining wall was the PvE wall, which fell in May of 2023. At this point, many soldiers had fallen, some had fled the country to other, better games, some even defected and joined the Team Fortress 2 country in hopes of finding a better experience. Many simply watched. Once again, the Team Fortress 2 players rejoiced. Overwatch is dead, they cried. However, when some looked at the country that Overwatch had become, they realized it resembled their own all too closely. Both countries had apathetic companies who didn't care for the game that built much of their foundation. Both had been optimized solely for the purpose of generating currency and increasing profit margins. Both had been promised content updates by their company and been denied them later. They were in very similar spots. For many, this comparison was too much to bear. Our game is still better, they cried, denying their realization. Others simply put down their pitchforks and left the war for good. All their fighting and all their conflict had resulted in nothing. The battles were always in the hands of higher powers, powers who were never going to listen to the voices of their citizens. Suddenly, the games that once seemed completely different from one another now seemed all too similar. The spectrum had narrowed, as did the perspectives of the soldiers still fighting for their side. The battle had accomplished nothing. Despite this, many paraded the remnants of their country as if it's something to be proud of. Soldiers from both countries will still brag about how solid their foundation is, ignoring the countless buildings being set on fire around it. Perhaps the battle between TF2 and Overwatch will never truly end. There will always be people fighting for what they think. However, the worthwhile discussion is being had elsewhere, where veterans peacefully talk about the qualities of the foundations that their companies once built. That's what should be admired and discussed. Perhaps if we discuss the quality of what once was, instead of debating the severity of what is, the companies in their ivory towers will remember what made their foundation so strong. And maybe, just maybe, they will change.